delayed start. I could blame it on technology, but that wouldn't work. I just pushed the wrong button, which apparently is the bad button to push. But we're back. Thanks for our help from the back corner there, getting us restarted. Would like to call the meeting to order, please. And so just to confirm, everyone is logged into their panel. All right. Anyone not logged in? All right. So first up is approval of the agenda. Anyone so moved? Diane, seconded by Sherry. Any questions or comments on the agenda? And all those in favor of approving it? Anyone not in favor? Good, so moved, thank you. Next, call for notices of motion and reports to the board. I don't believe we've had any, have we? No? Okay, on to 3.0, 3.1, minutes of the February meeting. Were there any concerns about the meetings as distributed? Pardon me, minutes of the meeting as distributed. Can I get some motioner to approve, please? I'll give that one to Rochelle and seconded by Leah. Any questions or comments? All in favor, please show your hands. Anyone not in favor? No, so approved, thank you. We're moving quickly tonight. We're making up for those couple of minutes off the front. So next up is 3.2. Superintendent Blackwell will be telling us about the gifted survey results and an update on the Lester B. Pearson to MMR Transition Committee.
So I believe I'm going to start. And you received with your agenda package last week this draft report that we have before you, and this is, as a reminder, this came about as a part of the Burlington PAR decision. Was a decision to look more closely at our cohort of students that are identified gifted in Burlington and look at in more detail their attendance choices and preferences within Burlington, and also to ask and to do a survey of them and find out their thoughts and opinions around program location options within the city. So we did that, and then you've heard about that at a previous meeting, how we were surveying all families of students identified gifted in Burlington. And we received those results back and had a great analysis done by our research department, which Terry leads, and then took those results and upon looking at those, drafted this report and recommendation. So, and sorry, I should say that, and then also looked at a number of other factors in determining this recommendation. And so in essence, what we are looking for is, should we be creating 2 locations for the provision of a secondary gifted program in Burlington? Is that within the preferences of families, and also would it enhance the numbers? Would the program potentially grow if we had another location because we're offering more choice and reducing travel times and making it more accessible to families? So what you see in this report is, and I'll sort of go backwards in the report, you see on the last page, you see the sort of the main responses in terms of that survey around where, and I know you've had time to read this, so I won't go into the detail, but it shows you where students attend, whether or not they're in a self-contained program currently, how much does proximity matter to them in terms of location, of where their child is attending and the program they attend. Those kinds of things are captured in the survey results in the Appendix B. And then if you look at Appendix A, you see maps of 3 cohorts of students. The first cohort in the row going across, you see those students in grade 8 in 2014, and then you see those same students, so the same cohort in terms of year of students in grade 9. And then the next year you see the same cohort, same grade of students going from 8 to 9. As you work down those rows, you see 3 different years of students. And so those location maps of where students live and where they attend also helped inform us that that proximity again played a role in seeing where students were choosing to attend. So those 2 pieces of information helped inform us. And then also we looked at other examples within our board of where we are providing more than one location for gifted. So one of those is in Oakville, where we have 3 locations for our high school gifted classes. And those choices of locations are appreciated by those families in terms of being able to make that choice. Then we also looked at how proximity weighs into our students' attendance, which we see strongly demonstrated in French immersion, where we know that the uptake in a school where French immersion is offered is the highest when it's highest from the students for whom that's their home school. So we see that repeated over and over again, where it's their home school or it's close by, students are more likely to choose that. So proximity again is a key piece of information. And then we also looked at our recent startup of gifted programming in high school in Milton, where that program is only, I'm looking to Jane, 4 or 5 years old. Thanks, Sherry, 4 years old. And by all accounts has been quite successful. It's an even smaller cohort, but as you're aware, we fill the class with highly able learners. So that's been quite a successful startup, and we have a lot of confidence in our ability to support our teachers and enhance their learning so that they're ready to provide great classes and programs when that startup happens. Because what we did hear also in the survey was how important high quality programming is. We had some parents that said, I'll send my child anywhere, but just make sure it's a great program. So we heard that loud and clear, and are quite confident that we can do that in more than one site in Burlington. We do it in 3 sites in Oakville, and we feel quite confident we can do that in Burlington as well. So some of those are sort of the main highlights that I'll mention in terms of what informed our decision making and what's in this, the recommendation in this report tonight. So we did take some time to meet tonight with Sherry and Dawn from ABC. We tried to earlier, but this is the earliest we could get together. So it was great that we had some time and spoke quite at length, because we thought ABC has quite a vested interest in this. So we wanted to give them some additional time to discuss this with us, and they had some great questions, which I think we were able to respond to, some other answers that you'd like to hear. But I don't know if you want to speak at all, Sherry or Dawn, to any of that conversation or your thoughts on this.
Sure. So I think what we were concerned about more than anything was that both locations would remain viable. It's not the biggest cohort in Burlington when you look at what Oakville has, and so our concern was if we split it into 2, would it become 2 fledgling kind of programs, and or were we going to be not balanced between the 2 areas? And so if you had 30 students, would 25 end up in one location and 5 in the other? So when we looked at the data, it looked like it was relatively evenly split. I mean, it's not perfectly even, but it's not too top or bottom heavy. and we feel that expanding the program is a good thing to do, and it looks like the cohorts are growing, so there's an opportunity to actually grow the program in the city in 2 locations and make 2 successful. So that was what we were concerned about, and we're optimistic that we can be successful, and as long as we do a good job of planning that, then we support growing it into 2 locations.
Thanks, Sherry. Terry, do you want to talk at all to any more of the highlights around the survey results?
No, I say no and then I start speaking, but we did have a 44% response rate, which is a great response rate on any survey. We did send it out to every family, as well as where there were 2 parents, we ensured that both parents had access to that survey. So a 44% response rate gave us some really good data. It gave us some questions. We had some good conversations this afternoon, and we'll be going back and adding a couple of things within the report around the monitoring pieces, and also what else we can do to make parents aware of the program options as part of our work within our informing parents of all programs that we offer for secondary. The one thing that I didn't hear, and maybe I missed it, was the importance around the peer social pieces with that peer group. And when we spoke earlier, we talked about kids staying together, and that's great for most kids, and they want to stay with their social peer group. Sometimes they need a change, and that opportunity within Burlington doesn't exist if they want to maintain that program option. So by having 2 program locations in Burlington, that provides an opportunity where sometimes a change is good in terms of the kids that they're working with. We did talk a lot about the transportation. We looked at it and we knew that proximity was very important, especially in elementary respondents, and it became less so, but was the number 1 piece in terms of priority for secondary. We also talked a little bit about the program location for secondary students and their ability to participate in extracurricular given their transportation. So by having, again, another program location that provided opportunities outside of the school day as well that some of them may not have been involved in. Okay.
So this report is still in draft, and partly because we certainly want SEAC's input, and also because we have time. The implementation of this is not till September of 2020. We are hoping to take this to trustees this spring, potentially in April, but welcome input and your thoughts on anything here, because there's time for us to make changes and to tune it up before it comes forward to trustees. So we welcome any questions or comments on this.
So is he one on the list? Amy, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this report very much, and I also appreciate the consultation that you did with ABC. It really increases my comfort level because, as you know, I was approached by many members of the elementary cohort with concerns about balance and viability of programs, so this is good news. I would like to see in Appendix A, where we've got the dots for the kids that went to Bodwin and then the kids that went to Nelson, I would also like to see a dot showing all of the kids from that cohort that were identified gifted, not just the ones that chose self-contained. I would like to see where all of them live and see what impact that has. I also do believe that the location of the elementary program is equally as important. We've got the primary grades going to Ryerson and the junior intermediate grades going to Bodwin, and I think it would be much better for those students to be in one location from grades 1 to 8 in a more centrally located elementary school that has 1 to 8 programming, such as Macmillan, where it's not perfectly central, but it's pretty central to Burlington. and so that reduces the travel time for all students and may increase the number of students who wish to participate in the self-contained class. I think that always helps students make the decision when they go to secondary of whether or not they want to be in a cluster class. And if we're looking at program viability, then this is an important thing, is to ensure that the program in elementary is also attractive.
Thank you, Amy. Go ahead, Sherry.
Yeah, thanks. So what Amy talked about there with the elementary, I know that's not part of this report, and it's not something we're going to be discussing now, but I would like to request that we do address that in the near future here. So I don't know if we need to, agree that we need to get together, or we need you all to come back to us or something. But it's been moved around a lot, and it's been a bit of a point of irritation for a lot of parents, and having the thing move around probably isn't in the place that it needs to be. And if there's a better location that's more stable, and especially from a population growth and all that kind of point of view, we would absolutely like to see that as something that we can look at for elementary, because as Amy said, I mean, if we have a viable elementary, it will support a more viable secondary. So I know it's not part of this, but can we agree to take a look at that? Is that something we can do?
Sure. I'm sure you appreciate it. It's a bigger conversation than just gifted, because it affects the capacity of whatever school it's at. Has the potential to affect boundaries, which is a difficult thing. So it's not just a conversation in student services. It has to involve the planning department and others in that conversation. But certainly it's something that we have been talking about and will continue to. But I can commit that we would go back and look at that more closely.
Thank you, Sherry. I have a question. You want this to go to the board? Do you have a date for that in mind? Because I'm just wondering, what is the appropriate channel for people on SEAC who have not had a chance perhaps to read and digest all of this to provide their suggestions in response?
So right now, you can see there's a draft date on there of April 4th. So that's our tentative plan. And if there's not a great concern here tonight, which I don't think I'm hearing, I think that's the plan we would go forward with still. But that means there's still lots of time, right? Because that wouldn't be any changes wouldn't happen for another 2 weeks. In terms of the timing of what this takes, to get into the board package, et cetera. So there's certainly a couple weeks still for people to give us any feedback or ask any more questions. And the reason why we want to move along with it, if there is any big causes for concern, is that gives us more time to plan to do this right in terms of planning for transitioning of program. If we have to look at any sort of grandfathering plans around students, if that's part of it, gearing up for the program at MM and providing professional development for staff, all that, having more time is certainly beneficial for us. So if there's nothing to hold us back, that we'll move ahead with that April timeframe.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Any other questions or comments on this? No, seeing none. Thank you for that presentation. And then next is the Lester Pearson MMR update from Superintendent Blackwell. Go ahead, please.
Great. So first of all, thank you, Jason, for joining the committee. We asked at a previous meeting for somebody from SEAC to join the LBP MMR Integration Committee. So Jason has shown up and hopefully will be returning, or I don't know if you're circulating that around to different people. But
no, I'll be there.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. And Claire Proto had already been here in December, I think the last time I was here, to share some of the work that's happening around student transitions at MM Robinson. So I wanted to share on behalf of Principal Federico Lester B. Pearson is working, their student services department has a plan together, and they are working with Robinson. But I just wanted to give you a quick overview of a couple of things that they're doing in the near future. All parents, regardless of whether they have students with special education needs, received a mailed letter from Principal Proto welcoming both communities to as one community, and an opportunity to reach out. And I know that at the integration meeting that we had in January, there was a follow-up with the 2 parent reps that are on that committee that actually went and met with Principal Proto to ask some more questions around supporting students with special education needs. So as a result of that work, beyond the opportunities that parents have at this time of year to contribute to IEPs and provide input, the Student Services Department has developed a plan, and they are working, and this is specifically for students with an IEP, working with families to review and update their IEPs. The parents are also going to be provided to make individual appointments to discuss specifically transition plans for their child. And there will be another opportunity. An invitation is going to be sent to parents that are in grade 11 and 12 with an IEP to go to an accessibility night at the school at Pearson, which talks about opportunities for post-secondary education with a spec ed lens. In April, through the annual review process, Pearson's Student Services Department has also put in an invitation to students and their parents who may be feeling anxious or concerned about their transition to Robinson to tour the school. And this tour would happen when students are not in the building. So when they will have an opportunity either by themselves or with their parents to get to know more of the facility without having the big crowd in place. And there'll be 2 different days that are created for that. And obviously a lot of flexibility in meeting parents and families' needs outside of the school day as well, as you heard from Principal Proto. The staff are continuing to work together to share IEPs and collaboratively to create timetables. So schools work really hard to balance timetables for students, knowing the student needs, and bringing both staff together and really having the opportunity to look at kids individually and timetables specifically for them is a big focus. And then in May, continued tours. Again, the school is basically open door for families and kids to come in and make a connection with caring adults. At that point in April, the staffing is pretty much complete, so students will know which teachers are going with them from Pearson to As you know, teachers may choose to apply to different schools as they would from any school in any year. But schools will then have an opportunity to have that adult connection and support some of the touring. And they will also look at some intentional scheduling for students that might be taking GLE or GLS, knowing the kids. And as you know, Principal or Vice Principal Newcomb, who is the Pearson Vice Principal, is the Vice Principal at in the fall. So there's a lot of work on the administrative side as well. The other update with Pearson and is that in the staffing allocation, so at this time of year, schools are given their headship structures, and they're given a number of department heads based on the number of students they have, plus they're giving a student services head. We have put in a transitions lead, which is a leadership position for next year, an additional staff member who is currently a teacher at Pearson, who is working very hard with the school already at to create opportunities and ensure that we are supporting and tracking kids not only before they go, but through that first year and beyond at So we're really excited to announce that that person has been named, and his name is Joel Yen. Joel Zen, and he is a teacher at Pearson right now. So he knows the kids very well, and both sets of kids, both leadership teams. So we're excited about that. So I'd be happy to take any questions, if you have any questions that I can take back to the school.
I don't see any at this time, Terry. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Diane, please.
Thank you, Superintendent Blackwell. You mentioned that the kids would have a tour of the school when there are not students in attendance. And I'm concerned about students with learning disabilities going for a tour of the school and there's nobody there, and they'll come home and say, oh, it was awesome. I could move around the hallways and nobody bothered me, nobody jostled me, nobody pushed me, nobody shouted at me. This is awesome. I really like this. And that's not reality. So will they have an opportunity when students are there?
And they already have. They've had a couple already. So this is based on what they know now and what their comfort level is. If there are feelings of anxiousness that they want to have the opportunity to tour with no one in the building and get to know these places, and that's what they'll have additional opportunities. But there are plans. There's a student voice subcommittee that's working really hard to have opportunities throughout the semester to bring them together. Because I agree, that would not be the first. Yeah.
Thank you, Diane. I don't see any other people on the list. Superintendent Blackwell, thank you very much this evening. Appreciate your time and effort on that. Before I move on to the next item on the agenda, I must apologize for not having recognized Director Miller or Chair Grabent. My mistake. I'll blame that on the technology this time. Well, I mean, officially recognize you, yeah, but yeah, I should have said that when we started, but you know, I was under pressure and this wasn't working and things. It's been a long day. Yeah, well, it doesn't matter who broke it. It's not the blame game. That's not what we're playing. As long as I can blame it on them, that's the idea. So up next is special education review and presentation by Mark and Denise.
Nope. Alana's here.
Oh, pardon me, Alana.
It's okay. Sorry, last minute change.
It's just going by.
I know, it's the last minute change.
Thanks. I'm changing seats so I can help work the technology here. So I think you met Lana back in September. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
If you're 6 months.
If you recall, she came and we did just an introduction so you could put a face to a name. And Alana has been working diligently as our external reviewer to come in and look at our second phase of the review. And you've been hearing updates from Janice. And here we are now at a final report. So that I did mention was coming late, and you didn't receive it until last night, but that was until because really the steering committee didn't see it till Friday. We've been working hard and fast to get it ready, and then it had to go to admin council yesterday, and that's why you didn't see it till last night. So I apologize that it's coming to you so late, and appreciate that there's whatever the number is, 50 or so pages here to read and digest. And so we've come tonight knowing that you haven't had time to read it. And so Alana has prepared a presentation here that's really sort of an introduction to the report. Give you a high level summary of what's in there, and the intent being that then you have chance to go ahead and read it and really dig in and develop your questions during the coming month. And then we'll put this back on the agenda for the next few meetings to give us time to really process it more as a group. So that's our intent. Okay. So let's put and I will send this slideshow that Alana just developed today for us. Once again, you know, this is all coming pretty fast. So appreciate that she's put this together. So I will send it to you. And does that say slideshow? Yes, it does from the beginning. So here we go.
We're all good?
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. Okay.
So just I'll drop the lights. Oh, this one here.
That one there? Okay, perfect. Good evening. I would like to start with thanking, from the outset, the review involved a group of individuals who provided ongoing guidance and support, which is our steering committee. And I'd like to thank each and every one of those members for helping me strategize, facilitate, and build the review over the past 6 months. Okay. So start with the purpose of the review. So the overall purpose for phase 2 was to examine the elementary special education referral, identification, and placement pathways for students with autism, learning disabilities, and giftedness. The 3 exceptionalities were the focus for this phase. The review focused on collecting information that would speak to the fidelity, the consistency, the effectiveness, and the efficiency of the processes and the procedures. Okay, the evidence acquired through the review was used to guide future decisions, or will be used to guide the future decisions for improving these processes for these students. Review questions. As a committee, we asked a series of questions. Several came up. I think there were about 35 or 40 initially. We all kind of did kind of a brainstorm and threw all those questions out. And we came together and decided on 5 key questions to guide the research and the review. Those questions involve: what are the pathways? What are those procedures for referral identification and placement? What are the key stakeholders? What do the key stakeholders think about the processes and the procedures? How do the procedures align with ministry guidelines? How do the pathways compare with neighboring school boards? And what are the estimated cost allocations? Now, number 5 will be shared at a later date. We are still in the process of collecting that data. The review components. So in order to answer the review questions, we established a review framework that included 5 corresponding components. And these are the components here with the data that connects with them. So an overview of student enrollment, the procedures and the pathways, the perspectives of our stakeholders, the alignment with the ministry guidelines, lots of document reviews. With the stakeholders, we conducted 12 focus groups and 3 interviews involving representatives from here in SEAC, and the models and neighboring school boards, looking at their documents and following up with consultations with representatives from the special education departments within those boards. Okay. Elementary student enrollment. We can see here that the table indicates that there's a distribution among students within each of the exceptionalities, and these distributions vary by gender, location, division, and the type of support where these students are. And over 5 years, the lower table, over 5 years, we can see that our average proportion of students with autism and learning disabilities was less than that of the region and the province, and we have a relatively lower proportion of gifted students. Sorry, we have a relatively larger proportion of gifted students. And then over time, our proportions of students with autism have been decreasing while the region and the provinces are increasing. All 3 population proportions are decreasing among our students with learning disabilities, and our proportions of students with giftedness is increasing while the region remains stable and the province is decreasing. Okay. In order to determine the perceptions of our stakeholders, we conducted focus groups with staff from student services, staff within schools, teachers and principals, and parents of students with autism, learning disabilities, and giftedness. 2 groups of students per exceptionality. Just 2 groups of parents of students with those exceptionalities. We also conducted interviews with SEAC representatives, and through the series of all the discussions that were had within those 15 groups, we pulled out those common themes and identified and reported on all of those particular themes. So what we have in writing in the report are not just one-offs or 3 or 4 people talked about. They were common themes that were drawn from each and every one of those focus groups and interviews. So I'll just pull out a few key findings with respect to the referral process. Many parents and staff indicated that it was pure teamwork. For SRT and in-school team. Very efficient, supportive, inclusive, and collaborative working together. Some parents indicated that EAs were not necessarily included in these meetings and found that it was very important to have that happen. Early gifted screening and assessment, definitely a key theme that came across all of these focus groups and interviews. Participants talked about the system pressure for primary screening and assessment, for inconsistent referral practices across the system based on the differing levels of knowledge of our staff within the classrooms. Staff felt that the results for the primary gifted screening may be unstable and unreliable given the young age of these kids, and the student needs can be met in the classroom was a perspective from the staff as well. And they voiced concern about the primary screening success rates. In terms of identification process, there were some inequities that they voiced between the exceptionalities. Particularly, there was a strong sense that primary identification is expected for gifted children and not necessarily expected for the other exceptionalities, and in fact sometimes discouraged in the primary years. They talked about the board-wide gifted screening, and that was the only exceptionality that actually screened for any exceptionality. Differing external criteria that may be accepted for LD and may not, differing exceptional criteria may not be accepted for LD and typically accepted for gifted. Again, perceptual. Okay. Stakeholder perspectives continued. With respect to placement process, they indicated that the students are placed in a very timely manner. Many staff and parents noted their appreciation with the new structured learning class and were hopeful that this type of class would be available to more students in the future. In terms of inequities where placement was concerned, there was one key one that came up quite frequently throughout the conversations, that is the gifted classes begin in grade 1 and the learning disabilities class begin in grade 4, not necessarily equitable. In terms of communication, throughout the focus groups, the parents indicated that they were not aware or had not been told about the Working Together guide. I had a guide with me, which I sent around. I distributed around each and every one of the groups. And the parents did indicate that they had not seen it or were not referred to it online or in hard copy. And in terms of support in the classroom, so although this wasn't a focus of this particular phase, many of the conversations went there. We found it prudent to include that in this particular report as well. There was lots of concern about the IEPs, parents noting that there were implementation issues and development issues with the IEPs within the classroom. And then on the other hand, staff were indicating how beneficial they were for students. And student progress in the self-contained class versus the resource support classes, the perception is that there's greater progress happening within those self-contained classes. Alignment with ministry and education guidelines.
Sorry, Lana,
Yep.
Maybe I'll jump in for a moment. So in the steering committee, we had a lot of conversation about the feedback that was received through the focus groups, and that we were hearing from, if you recall back, about approximately 50 staff and approximately 50 parents. And so these are all staff and parents that volunteered to be a part of this, which we really appreciate. And we're conscious that these 50 of each aren't necessarily representative of all parents and staff, yet they are valid perspectives and voices that we want to hear. So when you think there's about 10,000 students with an IEP, and you have 50 parents that have volunteered to be a part of these focus groups, we anticipated and appreciate that the 50 that volunteered probably weren't volunteering because they were happy, thrilled, excited with the experiences that they have or their children have in the system. So we anticipated that. At the same time, like I said, we wanted to hear, those are still voices and perspectives that are very important. So we were cautious as we moved ahead with looking at the data, and then you'll see further on, considering recommendations, that although we couldn't say this is representative of all parents or all staff, they are representative of some. And there are voices that we definitely need to hear because, as you'll see, there are a number of actions that talk about improvements, especially consistencies across schools and programs that we want to address because of these concerns. So, and you'll see if you have time to read in the report, I think it's around page 6 or so, there is a section there that talks about limitations, that because of the size of the sample group, that there are some assumptions that we can't make because of the sample size. So I thought it's important to point that out.
And to keep that in context when looking at those results. That's very true. Thanks, Mark. Moving on to the alignment with Ministry of Education guidelines, we had a very clear indication that the HDSB is well aligned with ministry guidelines. We have lots of parent inclusion, the referral.
Sorry to interrupt. Just have a couple of questions, if you don't mind, right now, if that's all right.
That's fine.
Please go ahead, Amy.
Thank you. On the 2 preceding slides, I couldn't help but notice some inconsistency with regard to perspective. Where we see in the referral process, under the early gifted screening and assessment, we see that there's an inconsistent referral practice, which seems to stem from an inconsistent level of staff knowledge. But then we see that staff is unhappy with the low screening success rates. And I have to wonder if that's because they're not adept at determining who should be screened. Then on the next screen, where it talks about greater progress in self-contained than in the regular classroom, if the perception is that they're doing better in self-contained than in the regular classroom, then the concern that the student needs can be met in the regular classroom, which was found on the previous slide, is inconsistent with that. There's a lot of incongruencies with what the perspectives are. And I just think it's really important that these all be framed as perspectives and not as solid facts, because if we frame them as solid facts, then we're about as inconsistent as the Bible. And that, we really need to make sure that when we frame this data, that we frame it in such a way that we're understanding that these are perspectives.
Thanks, Amy. For sure. We had many of those same discussions. And so when we get into the recommendations, you'll see a lot of it is focused on improved knowledge, improved communication, improved understanding, to make sure people fully understand, are well informed, that we have consistent practice in schools, those kinds of things. You won't see recommendations that say, oh, we need to make this change to a program or to a service based on a perception. So we are really careful about that, because we know that if we were going to do anything like that, we need much more hard data about that, right? So just if that helps put you at ease, that. But I think it's really important that we're hearing this, because these are some people's perceptions, right? I know that we're listening to some of the perceptions of staff around some things. Jane and I were kind of looking at each other in the meeting saying, that's not true. That's not our practice. That's not our, the messaging. But some staff think it is, right? So it points to the areas that we need to work on, which is what's really helpful.
Thank you for alleviating my concern.
Yeah.
Yes, framing them in the framework of perceptions is absolutely essential.
There is also one more question. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not alleviated. If you can go back to that perception slide. So I have a couple of comments about it, as well as the following slide, but what's the point of that slide? I mean, this is a handful of people's perceptions or perspectives. So for example, is this the one that has, or maybe it's the one with the inequities? Okay. Yeah, I saw inequities 2 or 3 times, and I don't understand the perceptions whatsoever, because when you talk about inequities, anytime we start comparing kids with different exceptionalities and we say that there are inequities, it completely goes down a rat hole and is not valid in any way, shape, or form. Because every child with a different exceptionality requires different things. Should, I say, for example, that it's not equal that kids who are identified gifted don't get assistive technology. Well, it's not equal. We don't get any. Well, of course, that's ridiculous. We don't need it, right? That's not something that is needed by our exceptionality. So to say that there's inequities because kids who are gifted have more, I saw somewhere have more access to a self-contained classroom. Well, I listen to my colleagues at the table who say, well, we want inclusion. Some of these associations say we want inclusion. We don't want a self-contained class. Our first choice is inclusion. That's a completely different perspective. And that's not that there's an inequity, is that there's a different strategy for different exceptionalities. So that really bothers me, that these are some, whether we call them uneducated or these are just random people's perceptions that are now on a slide that are made to look like facts. And so saying that, student needs can be met in a regular classroom, well, who said that? I could probably show you twice as many people who said that they can't be. So I find this very problematic. And I don't want to pick apart every bullet at this point, but I just find that this data and showing this publicly is very problematic when it's just a very small handful of random people with their opinions. Because you could find a completely different group of 50 people with very different opinions. So I'll wait and go through the whole presentation, but I hope that we're not basing recommendations on any of this.
Yeah. So similar comments and things that we wrestled through as a steering committee. So I think thanks for your patience and waiting to the end, because you'll see that we didn't go there in terms of recommendations, in terms of saying that this is facts, because we know they aren't, right? They're perceptions.
Okay, now moving on to the alignment with ministry education guidelines. It is absolutely clear that the HDSB is well aligned with the ministry guidelines. Some areas of improvement with respect to alignment from the stakeholders indicated that they'd like to more sharing of the Working Together Parent Guide. Definitely parents are very interested in learning about the process and having a resource to go to understand it, rather than having to always ask the school on their own time. It being available on the internet was quite surprising to them, given that they weren't referred to that, these particular people anyways. Invitational messages to parents regarding any meetings for IPRC. They're indicating that we could definitely improve in that area, and sharing the rationale for prioritizing those regular classroom and resource support prior to self-contained classrooms would be beneficial as well. Thank you. Models in neighboring school boards. We chose 5 school boards that were viewed as frames of references for the review and their procedure. We looked at their procedures and reviewed their processes and practices and compared to our processes and practices. The 5 boards ranged in size. They were close in proximity to Halton and offered a range of placement options. They consisted of Dufferin Peel Catholic, Halton Catholic, Hamilton Wentworth, Peel District School Board, and Waterloo Region District School Board. In terms of similarities, all school boards had multidisciplinary teams to engage in problem solving. Categories of exceptionalities and definitions were all as issued by the ministry. Resource support placements were offered from grades K or 1 to 8. And for those students with autism, 4 boards offered self-contained placements throughout elementary. And for gifted, 4 boards conducted screening in grade 4, followed by the WISC. In terms of key differences, we have differing levels of IPRC used for resource support and self-contained support among the 5 boards. And for those students with learning disabilities, self-contained classes, 3 boards offered from grades 4, 5 through to 8. 1 board offered grades 1 to 8, and 1 board does not offer this type of placement to the student with learning disabilities. For the gifted students, self-contained classes were available in 4 boards between the grades 6 through to 8, and 1 board offered this type of placement in grades 1 through 8. So based on the collective findings, we created 8 recommendations with the intent to guide future decisions and improvements for the processes and procedures of the pathways. The first one being developing a special education communication plan. It's suggested that it should be in the form of an online information video, so it's accessible to all and very visual, with a focus on the Spec Ed website or the special education website, the Working Together Parent Guide, including IPRC process, how parents can be involved, the expectations of parents, student IEPs, and placement options available for students. Number 2, it recommended that the schools improve information sharing and communication among staff. That would be to ensure essential information is discussed during the meetings and the conferences about students. Recommendation 3, to use grade 4 screening assessment results to build learner profiles in addition to giftedness. So to flag those students whose results may suggest learning challenges. Number 4, to review and revise identification and assessment criteria for each exceptionality with a focus on special education classes and programs, as well as identification and placement criteria. Number 5, simplify the identification process for resource support placements. Present these students to IPRC or to in-school IPRC rather than to area IPRC. This parents and staff indicated that it might increase that accessibility for parents in terms of proximity of meetings, time of meetings, flexibility of meetings, and reduce the wait time for students for assessment, identification, and placement. Okay, recommendation number 6, to support primary students who demonstrate characteristics of giftedness in their home schools. And for these students, to continue to explore student profiles that suggest advanced skills and abilities, to consider resource support and self-contained placements, as well as extracurricular enrichment opportunities for these gifted students, and continue to build capacity among teachers and support staff through professional learning opportunities. Number 7, continue providing learning opportunities for staff supporting primary students with learning disabilities and autism. Focused professional learning for resource support staff to further build teacher capacity within the classroom. And finally, number 8 recommendation is to review and improve the IEP development and implementation process for these students with a focus on looking at staff perceptions, the procedures that are involved with developing IEPs and implementing, the content that goes into them, the fidelity and the consistency of implementation across the system.
So, Alana, I really appreciate you. She's taken 50-plus pages and condensed it into 12 slides, and for us tonight, so that we could once again get that high-level overview of what's in the report. There's also, I forwarded to you a one-page summary as well that you have there, so of the whole report as well. And I will send you this slideshow as well. Denise, do you want to make a comment as a member of the steering committee?
Sure. I just want to make a couple comments. The discussion that we had at the steering committee was really in depth at times, and to make sure that we had recommendations that, in my view, don't just apply to those three exceptionalities. I think that the recommendations that have come out of this can apply to all exceptionalities across the board, that although some of the perception data may say one thing, I think that we've taken the recommendations to say, look, there are pieces to this that every family under special education programming experiences: the improved communication, the sharing information among staff. I would say that most of these recommendations apply across the board, even though the data collection came from three exceptionalities. And I have to commend Alana. There was an extreme amount of data. I mean, we saw bits of it and a lot of it throughout the time that we were reviewing, and for her to be able to bring it together and come up with some recommendations that I think that are extremely useful and very valid for our families and our students is really a great effort on her part. And I know that these are perceptions of a relatively small group of people, but often perception is the way they see reality. And we can't disregard what they're saying simply because we don't agree with it. There are a lot of statements in here that I kind of looked at it too and went, not sure, but you know what? If someone thinks that, we need to know it. And if we hear it often enough, you begin to think, where's the silent majority who aren't saying it? So I want you guys to really, I'm going to put on my change management hat a little bit. And I think that we all need to take the report, and even I, who've had it since Wednesday or Thursday of last week, I'm still trying to digest it and really fully understand all of the pieces of it. And I think that before we start to pick it apart on our initial reaction that says, wait a minute, we need to really digest it, think about it, look at the recommendations, and think about what that means for our exceptionalities that we represent, or for our students that we represent, so that we can realize that what we're trying to do is improve for all students across the board the services and the programs that they have access to.
Thanks, Denise. And maybe I'll also mention that, so we've shared this with you tonight. Our intent is to share it with trustees at the March 21st board meeting. We've put draft on it tonight. If there's anything that's a real flag from you, we want to hear it. If there's something that maybe should be presented differently, obviously we're not going to change sort of the content in terms of what's been gathered, what the findings are. But if there's something that you want to share with us in terms of how information is presented, or something that's going to be more informative, we certainly want to hear that, so that we can make any adjustments for trustees, and knowing that this will be shared with the public as well. And also that the recommendations are just that, they're recommendations. I think there are several there that, my first blush says, this is a great recommendation and we should be acting on this. But there are others there that would require more thought about how we would go about that and what that would look like. So please don't take these as actions. These are recommendations that we would then consider as staff. And I think we're done from a presentation standpoint and would welcome questions.
Before I open the floor to questions, I understand Director Miller has a comment to make, and then I'll take questions from the floor, please.
Thanks, Jason. First of all, I want to thank the steering committee for the work they've done. This is, even though this was phase 2, this is the second year of a special education review. The purpose of that was to help us to try to identify as a board as a staff, where are we? Where are our gaps? Where are our deficits? And what can be enhanced, and so on. I'm not sure that over the course of it we've been able to complete that task, but because I think it was a massive task to begin with, and a year and a bit is probably insufficient to determine all that. Nevertheless, I agree with the comments made earlier that Amy and Sherry had said around perspectives, but they are perspectives we need to hear, but they can't guide our actions. And the recommendations, as Mark said, are recommendations, and we'll put them in front of the board. But in my many conversations with Mark and other members of the steering committee, I think the primary action that would come out of this is we need to do a better job in building our staff's capacity and in the IPRC process and communicating with parents and so on. And we recognize that because we recognize that that's a primary impetus of the work that we have to do now. So sure, there's some nuanced challenges here, some nuanced issues. There's some, I don't want to say concerning stuff, but sometimes when staff doesn't quite understand the way something works, is that their issue or is it our issue from not ensuring? And I would say it's probably ours. So we need to, there's some real important parts of this that have come out that we will need to work on. Obviously, because there's a lot of them, it'd be pretty difficult to do them all by the end of May. So we will go through those recommendations with the board and start determining which of those. And there's some that are a bit low-hanging fruit and some that are more complicated, and that's where we'll work. But I do want to thank SEAC for their input into the process. It's a significant process, and in my thinking, it's something we should undertake every few years, a review of the special education services that we provide. I'm not sure if we can always do that and stick to a cycle like that, but I think it's important because Sherry mentioned something about assistive technology. Assistive technology itself changes, and so we need to look at those things now. I know our staff does, and I know the Department of Student Services does, but it's great to bring an outside person like Alana in to help us with that. So thanks, Jason, for indulging my comments.
Thank you, Director Miller. First one up is Amy. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. With regards to the recommendations, I just had 3 comments. You spoke about making a video, and I think we need to remember that not all of our families are English first, and so we would want to make sure that that's available in multiple languages. Regarding using the grade 4 screening to build learner profiles other than gifted, I applaud that. I know I've asked for that before, and if we're doing the testing, we might as well be taking a really close look at what those results are, because I'm sure we can find other ways that we can be helping students. So this is wonderful. Regarding the characteristics, number 6, where we talk about support primary students who demonstrate characteristics of giftedness. I hope we're not determining those characteristics to be the checklist that teachers are asked to fill out in the SK grade 1 year, because that checklist is I have problems with that checklist. I don't think that it is accurate in its portrayal of characteristics of giftedness, and I would like to see us put together a really strong set of criteria for what we consider those characteristics to be, and that it be vetted by the ABC representatives that we have here to ensure that what we are telling teachers to look for is what they should be looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Sherry, you're next, please.
Thanks. Just a quick question. Did you consult any experts in the fields of either giftedness, autism, or LD as part of this research?
No, and that was an area that we talked a lot about as a steering committee, and because we recognize that spec ed is this big, and what was, we had to define a scope of this this review. And so decide that the phase one of the review gave us a good picture of our actual student body, our enrollment, our who are our kids. We got a good perspective of that, and we heard some good parent voice around that as well. So that was a good basis in phase one. In this, then we decided, let's start at the beginning of what do our processes look like around assessment, identification, placement, those things. So that's where we decided to go next. And so the need for an outside expert really didn't come in because we weren't talking about whether or not an assessment, the efficacy of assessment or the efficacy of a program, those things we weren't looking at yet. So that's why we didn't go there.
Thank you, Sherry. Any other speakers? No? And then I'll just finish with my own comments then. I do appreciate the work that the committee has done. It's been obviously quite a bit of data to work through. Your presentation tonight, Alana, was very good and clear, concise. I'm looking forward to reading the whole document, honestly. It was also good to see that a lot of the initial recommendations all had to focus on, I think it fit almost any exceptionality or identification, right? That particularly in areas of getting more information out to parents on the website, that's always a challenge that we've faced here on SEAC. And I think those, Diane was here back when we first started. The old website really wouldn't give us that sort of flexibility, and the new one does, and I hope we can take advantage of it. Both printed and AV content would be excellent. I see Sherry has come back on the list. Go ahead then, Sherry.
Thanks. Just a question on some of the data. Can we get access? I mean, we don't have to go down this path now if you don't want to, but I would like some detail on some of this data. So I'll tell you, for example, I'm looking at giftedness and I'm looking at the gender data, and it's bothersome to me that it's so off, that it's 60-30 or 62-38. I think we probably have an identification problem, which I know is part of the recommendations in the address that we're addressing. For example, I'd be really curious to know what that gender split is before the grade 4 assessments and then after the grade 4 assessments, when we hopefully are catching the people that we've missed. And I'm wondering if we're perhaps identifying more boys because of behavior issues when they're, so I'm just trying to think about that. So if we have a list of more data that we would like, can we ask for that, and who would we send that to?
Yeah, so if you, any questions that you're thinking of as you read through the report, if you could pull those together, I'd suggest sending those to Lorna, and she will collect those. And then we'll, if we can, if I can answer them, or staff can, great. Or if Alana can help answer them, however, and that would be, I'd like to be able to get those to you if we can prior to if you can get your questions to us before the next meeting and we can get answers to you before the meeting, that would be great. And I think that would help move our conversation along. Because like I said, we'll bring this back over the course of the next few meetings, because we know we need time to process this as a group.
Great. Well, thank you, Mark and Alana, for the presentation. It's very informative. Thank you. Next on the agenda is budget. Do you want to do that from there, Mark, or from up here?
Wherever you like. So
it's your time. You use it as you wish.
Yeah. So we when Denise and Jason and I, thanks, Lana, were looking at the agenda tonight, we put budget on there sort of as a placeholder in the event that we were able to talk about it. And I can tell you that we don't have information to do that tonight for a couple of reasons. Number one, our enrollment growth looks fairly flat going into next year. There may be a little bit more in one panel than the other, but there's not a lot of enrollment growth, and you know that the vast majority of our funding is based on student enrollment. So without much of an increase in student population, we don't see much change in our budget. Second, it being an election year, we know that funding announcements continue to come, different things happening. That's the reality and the pattern that we know happens with election years. And so as staff, we are hesitant to make assumptions or predictions about what's happening with the provincial budget until we actually see the budget go out and the actual funding roll out to boards. So we're being pretty cautious in terms of what kind of actions we take around budget at this time. So we will talk about budget here. I think we have 2 meetings set in April with that intent, but it would be premature for us to do it tonight. So it was there as a placeholder, but it'll be on hold till another meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Next on the agenda is questions from the public. Do we have any at this time? No. Just one moment. Yeah, thank you. So for the benefit of those viewing over the web, you said there's what, 5,000?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, there's a 5 anyway. I realize we don't normally draw large crowds for this, but for starting now and until we get an online form available on the website, if you do have a question for the committee that you want us to review as part of one of our meetings, please send it to Lorna Goodrow here. Her email address is goodrowl@hdsb.ca. And if you send that question to her, she'll make sure it gets into the right hands, and we'll answer it for you at the next meeting. Next on the agenda, Section 6, communication to SEAC.
Don't forget this one.
Oh, sorry. Okay, no, it's not. It's 5. SEAC discussion and question period. Do we have any questions? Go ahead, Sherry.
Thanks. Over the last couple of months, I've had some parents call me with concerns around, and they're a little bit different, but they seem to have a similar theme. And the theme is that the staff that they're encountering at the school is giving them what I think is incorrect information. So, for example, one parent called and said that her student was joining the HDSB from a private school and would be going to their home school and hopefully going through the process and eventually moving to a placement or a program in the fall. And in the meantime, would be looking forward to an IEP to support this child who has an identification and there's several months still in the school year, and was told that, oh, we just don't have the capacity to differentiate in a classroom. And another parent called to tell me that the teacher of the self-contained classroom said that she was not able to differentiate, that she just didn't have time to do that. And I know those are individual cases with individual staff members at individual schools, but at almost every SEAC meeting, I find that one of us around the table, it's not always ABC, it's often LD, or it could be autism, or I hear it from Sophia with Down syndrome. almost every meeting, if not every meeting, somebody brings up a situation where a family was given incorrect information. And so, you know, there's been a pattern of this, and in each case, I think everybody tries to do the right thing and tries to go to the school and tries to correct that. But honestly, it's almost becoming too much and too much of a pattern. So what I would like to know is, you know, do we have a problem across our system? What can we do to fix this across so that the people who are working in our schools are telling our families the right thing? You know, why is it that teachers don't think they need to differentiate and follow an IEP? Why is it that parents are being told by a CERT that their child is not going to have the accommodations met in a classroom? Why is it that, you know, and I can't think of all the other examples that others around the table have given, but I'm just concerned that we have too many people across our school system who are giving out incorrect information to parents. And so rather than dealing with each individual one, I mean, this keeps happening, and I don't know if the rest of you want to chime in, but what can we do that's more across the board to try to address this?
I'll put that to you, Mark.
Thank you. Great question, Sherry. And I think that I'd say we need to go at it both ways. That that individual circumstance I want us to address, because that circumstance is happening or has happened. It needs to be addressed. So we've had conversations around the table here how you might steer that parent in terms of the problem-solving pathway and what that looks like. I know many of you do that in your conversations with parents. Some of you have come to me afterwards and said, you know, it's still not working. And they've tried, you know, through the pathway. And so we've talked about what next. And sometimes I've become involved, and we do those kinds of things. So those individual circumstances, I think we do need to address. The larger ones, for sure, we need to look at, and that's, I think, was echoed in the review. Like we heard there that there are things we need to do that make sure that we are really well informed. I say we, I mean everyone, parents, staff, community partners, everyone fully understands everything about our programs and services and our criteria, everything, all those things. So that's why I was pleased that the recommendations from the review go right at some of those things and identify those as areas of need. So some actions we're going to move on pretty quick. Well, I shouldn't say we're going to. We have been moving on, and we will move on more so in a variety of ways to try and improve that. Because, and some of you have said to me, I know that when I get a call, it's because someone's unhappy, and that this is that person's experience. And you've been great in saying to me, I know that there are another 100 or 500 or whatever number of parents that I'm not hearing from. And that's because they are having great experiences. So I appreciate that you bring that perspective to the conversations. But that doesn't discount that one person who did call you, right, and what their experience is. So I think it's important that we bring balance to the conversation, but it doesn't mean that we don't act, right, that we need to do a number of things. So I think that and once again, the recommendations in the review go there, I think, what you're talking about. So I don't know if you want to, I welcome if you want to talk more than that. But when you have the time to read into, because there's the recommendations are over a number of pages in the report, there's quite a bit of detail there about how to improve, understand information flow, understanding, consistency, all those things. There's quite a bit of detail there in the recommendations.
And I did notice that. So I think, you know, if that's the answer, that we're going to implement that in the recommendation, I think that does address what I'm asking. And so I would ask that there be, you know, openness and sharing with us about what those processes are going to be. You know, how are we going to make sure that every single CERT, every single administrator, every single teacher knows the same thing, that can give the same answer. That would be ideal. So if you can share that with us as you create that, then I think that would help.
Denise, go ahead, please.
I think I just want to echo a little bit. The one thing that we talked about quite a bit on the steering committee was inconsistency. So that's where that pain comes from, where you're getting, if a child can be at one school and get one level of support and one answer and go to a different school and get a different level of support and a different answer, that's inconsistency in the system. And that's where your pain, the pain that a customer, if I put it in those perspective, is feeling. And that was one of the things we talked about a lot on the steering committee is inconsistency. Every time something would come up, I would say, look, that's an inconsistency. Whether it's an inequality or equity is a different story, but an inconsistency is the first thing you have to tackle. A student with a learning disability or with whatever their identification is should experience the same thing no matter what school that they go in terms of communication, in terms of knowledge, in terms of support. We don't have that. So I think that it's not just that our staff may be missing pieces of knowledge. I think that we have different processes. Well, I know that we have different processes happening at different schools, and that is what creates some of these issues. And then what's happening, to your point, is parents are getting so frustrated that they're reaching out to everyone and anyone. And then they're kind of saying, it's like, I don't know what to do. I'm frustrated. My child is not getting what they need. Where do I go? And I think that we need to close the gap on that inconsistency. And these recommendations go to a certain extent, but I think that we need to go even further. Because in an ideal world, in my optimist world, as I call it at work, a student can go to any school, get the same service, get the same communication, get the same support, no matter where they're going.
Thank you, Denise. I put myself on the list because I'd like to, and Sherry have said about this, certainly my experience in talking with parents has been indications of inconsistencies across different identifications, from school to school, teacher to teacher, and geographic as well, right? Depending on, and this is my own analysis based on, my own experience and anecdotal information and so on, that particularly larger schools that have, whether they have self-contained classes, they have CPP classes, it's more ingrained in the school culture and the faculty and the staff at the school that they understand special education better than perhaps the smaller schools that may only have a few students with special needs spread out throughout the classrooms. And that's nothing against the people that work in those schools. It's like anything else, right? If you live in the woods, you learn to understand wildlife. If you live in the city, you learn a different kind of wildlife, but they're not necessarily, rabbits and bunnies. So that's a weird analogy, I realize, but that's just the way I look at it, right? You know what you know what you live with. So I've certainly, seen examples of that kind of inconsistency as well. So are there any other questions or comments from the table, the floor? Oh. Well, then we are moving on to 6.0. Communications to SEAC, beginning with superintendent's report.
Thanks, Jason. So the report I sent you last night, you can see 3 areas I wanted to highlight today. One is this clarifying criteria. And this is a recommendation in the review that we've actually started on before this report, but partly because we saw this need coming, and then it sort of surfaced in the report as well. So we thought this is, we're sort of maybe jumping ahead a little bit of one, and acting already on one of the recommendations, but because we know it's a need. And so what you see there is we have been working on sort of pulling together, because we have different places where this is articulated, and some places not really articulated at all, where we need real clarity for everyone, and by everyone I mean parents, staff, other members of the public to really understand what are our criteria in a variety of areas, which includes for an assessment, for an identification, for a placement, the descriptions of different placements in classes, all those things really, really clear. And they exist in places like parts of the special education plan. They exist within some of our internal documents within the department. But all that we're going to pull together and then vet with a number of stakeholders to understand, to make sure that that language is clear for everyone. We're not drifting into acronyms and jargon, but it's really accessible to everybody. So that is in process right now, and we'll come to SEAC for input as well. Second, I thought SEAC would like to hear that there was a presentation on our mental health strategy to trustees at the Committee of the Whole last week. And Michelle Bates, our mental health lead. I think most people were familiar with our past mental health lead was Teresa Wilson, who retired last year. And so Michelle has taken on this role and comes with a lot of experience because in her last board, she worked in Hamilton Whitworth and she was the mental health lead there. So she comes with a lot of background and experience and did a bit of a presentation with trustees, but then had quite a bit of questions and dialogue afterwards. And I see there are no trustees in the room right now, but, oh, sorry, Leah and Michelle are here. I don't know if you want to make any comment or you don't have to, but we did that at Committee of the Whole last week. And then third, I thought we would share with you some professional development that's going on for school administrators. We do lots of professional development ongoing in our system all the time. But I thought I would highlight this because we have what we call family of schools meetings once a month with our administrators, where we have a focus on professional development for 2 hours, and then some other follow-up pieces happen after that. And if you can appreciate, getting time on that agenda is challenging as a system team because everyone wants to get to administrators. So whether you're in elementary program or you're in the equity department or you're in our work in student services or research or on and on, everyone wants time with administrators because we know how key administrators are next to the classroom teacher in terms of the success of our students. So, when we get an opportunity, like, the majority of a family of schools meeting to do professional development with our educators or with our administrators, we want to take full advantage of it. So I thought it'd be good for you to see some of the types of topics that we're doing with them on that day. Obviously, they're not doing all of those because we know that a good adult learning model is to give people choice. So they'll be able to choose across these topics, a number of them that they can participate in a carousel type of format to enhance their learning in this variety of areas. So I thought you would want to see that and know what kind of learning is going on for our school admin. And that's my report for tonight. I'd be happy to take any questions or comments, or we can move on.
Just one short question, Mark.
Yeah.
Last line there, supporting LD learners in U-level courses. What is U-level?
University.
Okay, good. Thanks.
So recognizing that we have students with learning disabilities across, a whole range of ability areas, and sometimes that can get lost a bit, or when you get to the university level. So it's a real focus on that.
Thank you for that. Next, do we have any association reports this evening? Go ahead, Carla.
So April. Not loud enough?
I'm just used to being loud, so not using microphones because people are usually like, not use that. Yeah, so just to give you a heads up, Mark, the Autism Ontario, the Halton chapter, usually has their flag raising at Oakville City Hall, but it's under construction, so they were asking about the New Street Education Office, so I gave them your name. You're super welcome. That's all.
Go ahead, Sherry.
Thanks. So we've got a couple of events coming up with ABC now we're struggling to find dates, so at the next meeting I'll be able to give you the exact dates, but in April we'll be having a general parent information session for all parents of kids, and we'll have some guest speakers, and we'll be able to talk about some interesting topics, and we're working on all of that, but I wanted to mention it so people can start to think about at least knowing that we're going to be doing something in April. And then again, we'll be having our annual picnic first or second week of June. So the next meeting I'll be able to give you dates, but I wanted to let people know that we were working on those two events.
Great, thank you. Denise.
I know I'm not an association, but I've done this before. But Special Olympics on Burlington is doing a Raise the Flag ceremony tomorrow at City Hall at 10:30 a.m. with, what? Yeah, well, you know, with some of our Special Olympians there, as well as the Knights of Columbus. The other piece is Special Olympics just received a major donation from Compass Point Bible Church in Burlington, which is going to go a long way for helping their athletes. But if you are around City Hall tomorrow at 10:30, I think the mayor is reading a proclamation, and because we have several athletes going to nationals, including Carla's daughter, Zoe, is going to nationals in Nova Scotia in the summer.
Okay, thank you, Denise. Trustee reports. Rochelle, go ahead.
Thank you. So tomorrow, the PAR implementation Aldershot High School focus exploration motion will come before the board to be voted on. And as you know, the board is interested in developing and implementing an innovation STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math program at Aldershot School. And this came about as a recommendation out of the Program and Accommodation Review to develop a magnet school at Aldershot. We will also be looking at a motion regarding the school naming committee has reviewed 200 names for Milton number 10, and the two names they have left on the list are Viola Desmond. I always want to call her Davis, which is her maiden name, but Viola Desmond, who is a Canadian hero and an inspiration to many young students. And the other name is, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, Maui, which is Ojibwe name or word meaning all of us, all together. The next thing on the agenda for trustees tomorrow is to vote on the student trustee policy, which is being presented to the board after much discussion in the past few months. And one of the key points that's coming forward is the unanimous support of equal weighting towards voting between elementary schools and secondary schools. We will also be reviewing the school year calendar. The committee has prepared a draft calendar which takes into consideration instruction days, professional activity days, and holidays. So that's coming to the board for review tomorrow. And then Director Miller is bringing forward a report on the trustee determination and distribution. And the trustees must pass this motion, which decides on the distribution of students and wards for the upcoming election. And that's all I have. Does anybody else have anything? No? Okay.
Thank you, Rochelle. Excuse me. Next, committees and other reports. Anything from PIC? Go ahead, Dawn.
There was a meeting this past week, past week, where we had a presentation with regards to the theme, what's going to be the theme for the next PIC meeting next October, and that's looking at global competencies in the 21st century.
Great, thank you, Don. Accessibility Coordinating Committee.
So Melissa's not here, and as far as I know, they haven't had a meeting since our last meeting. I think their next meeting is the first week in April, so hopefully we'll have a report then.
Thank you, Rochelle. Equity and Inclusive Education Advisory Steering Committee. Go ahead, Diane.
The last couple of meetings of the Equity and Inclusive Education have concentrated on taking a look at a SWOT analysis and breaking up into groups to take a look at students and schools and community, and as far as, you know, what's working, what's not working, what opportunities do we have. We've been using the Ministry Equity and Inclusive Education guideline as our guideline, so we continue to work on that.
Thank you, Diane. Who is speaking to the Working Together document? I'm not sure. Is that you, Sherry?
Well, it could be, except for I missed the last meeting because I had a sick kid, so I'm going to defer to Mark because he was there and I wasn't. So, Mark, could you give an update?
Sure. So we had our next meeting with this group, and we had staff from the Equity Department and IT and Communications all come and join us to share with us what we should be considering when we're looking at the revisions to this document, and I guess the potential of where we could go, what we could do with this. And the conversation expanded into a much broader look at our board website, and with the change in the website this past year, the potential for it being a fantastic resource for parents. And so we've kind of gone from the working together document to a much bigger view and sort of excitement about where we might go with our work. So that was really a conversation about how we might move ahead and what the potential of the work is and all the factors we need to take into consideration to do this work well. So that was most of the conversation in our past meeting. So we have more dates planned, and we actually did quite a bit of looking at other boards' websites. We had a long list of other sites we looked at to see the potential of how we can, not have to reinvent the wheel, but look at some great examples out there. Some of them are not so good, and some of them are fantastic, or at least elements that we really like from other websites. So we've been looking at that as well as part of this work, and it will continue.
We'll get to you in just a sec, Diane. Or did you want to speak further about? Oh yeah, go ahead then.
Mark and Sherry, does this committee have any idea when a current updated working together document will be on the website for parents to view?
No, we haven't got there yet. We're still talking about content and how and there was a revision, I believe, in 2016, so it's not, that's not that it would be terribly out of date. Is there a specific, something you're thinking about specifically that needs to be addressed right away, or?
To know when an updated version would be ready.
Okay.
I don't think we were working on an updated version of the current document. I think that the only meeting we had was to say, we don't want to update the current document. We want something that's better and new. And that's what we're working on. So I think if there's something that needs to be updated in the current document, like some minor things, somebody could probably do that. Otherwise, it's a bigger project.
Last item for committee reports. It's not on the agenda. I just realized, I hope you don't mind me adding it ad hoc. I didn't realize it was not there until just now. Lester B. Pearson MMR transition and Integration Committee does not meet this month due to March break, but we do meet April 12th. So there's been no update since our last SEAC meeting. There will be an agenda next meeting, but we're not sure what's on it yet. Yes, we try to have the agenda on a frequently scheduled basis, but right now we don't have the agenda set for our next meeting. Yeah, we'll probably talk about, will there be an update on special education review at that point, do you think?
Well, I think we'll have an opportunity for us to come back and say, okay, now that we've read it, let's talk through our questions and comments and thoughts, and certainly we'll do that. And we may have budget on the next agenda. It will depend on some other things.
So that would be the two big items to look forward to.
Yeah.
So next, anyone care to raise a motion to adjourn? Leah and Sherry, sorry, we're going to have to go to photo replay on that. I was like, wow, I didn't think. I've heard about faster than light travel, but I've never actually witnessed it. Any objections to adjourning the meeting? No? All in favor? Those opposed? So carried. Thanks very much, everyone, this evening, and we'll see you again.
She's on mute.
Probably.
Yes, she is.
Bye,
Lisa.